Welcome to the latest edition of National Gypsum's AIA webinar series. My name is Alan Zedek. I'm the Construction Design Manager covering the Gulf and Southeast areas. I've been with National Gypsum for about 3.5 years and looking forward to many more. Also presenting today is Thad Goodman. Thad lives in the Columbus, Ohio area and is our Construction Design Manager for the Midwest and Great Lakes areas. And Thad has been in the construction industry for over 40 years, so a veteran out there in construction. And Thad and I are part of a team, and our team's primary responsibility is to help the architectural and specifier community write clear specifications. And we do that through lunch and learn presentations and, of course, project-specific meetings. So our team's goal today, and with all our webinars, is to build knowledge together. And hopefully you will learn a few new things today, and we'll look forward to your questions so that we can gain a little knowledge as well. So before I jump in, a few quick housekeeping items. Since we have such a large turnout for the webinar today, all attendees are in listen-only mode. So please feel free to use the Q&A to submit your questions. Several of my counterparts will be monitoring questions as they come in, and if we run out of time, all questions we didn't get to will be answered by your local construction design manager and back to you with those answers. And AIA credits will be submitted on your behalf if you included your AIA number at registration, and certificates of participation will be sent to all attendees. So here is our technical support group. You can see Pat out west, Thad up there in the Midwest, Scott up in the Northeast, myself in the Southeast area, and Frank in that Texas Central area there. And Trang Schwartz, you can see her picture on the left, helps with that of our sustainability and lead information. And Amy is our manager over our group. So here is a map. And, we are the largest domestically owned gypsum company in the US. And you can see here, the yellow is our gypsum plants, our paper plants and quarries. You can see our footprint across the US and a little up into Canada. And then you'll see the red are our joint plants located across the country. And then in the blue are our cement board plants that you can see also on the map that is shown here today. So as we mentioned, we will do your credits. This is for one health, safety, and welfare credit that you will obtain from watching today's course. And as well, this is a copyright protected presentation. You will all be able to have copies of this if you so desire after the presentation today. So let's get started here. We're going to look at some of our learning objectives, look at the various products available and identify specific location and outcome requirements. And we'll look at the significance of ASTM C840, which is the standard specification for application and finishing of gypsum board. We'll go into those details a little bit and then learn the differences between the different levels of finish. We'll go through each level to help everyone better understand that. And then kind of look at some of the most common mistakes and review industry documents for some of the corrective action out there. So we'll first look at the standards, go through the materials and terminology, which can vary by which part of the country you're in. And then we'll go through each step-by-step level of finish and proper installation, and then a summary and a brief synopsis at the conclusion. So looking at ASTM standards, you pretty much will see ASTM C840 and all your specifications out there. I mean, you can see what this covers, the minimum requirements for the methods of application and finishing of gypsum board, and including related to terms and accessories below here. Environmental conditions, you're going to see Thad talk about that numerous times today, how critical that is, especially in different parts of the country. It covers materials and manufacture. The substrate surface preparation, I mean, you have dust on that board before it's painted. You know, you're only as good as your substrate, so that would create a bonding issue, but your ventilation is another critical thing, your fire resistance of these products, sound control, application of gypsum board, your cutting, you know, the proper method, framing size, fastener spacing. I mean, covers pretty much everything for the gypsum applications out there under that specification. And then, you know, I mentioned ASTM C840, ASTM C1396 is included with that, which is all paper face gypsum. But also in that ASTM C840, under 5.7, the section that mentions taping compound, finishing compound, and all purpose shall meet the requirements of specification C475. So in that specification, it's for all your joint compounds, joint tape, and finishing gypsum board. So that is included through the C840 as well. But you can see here, you know, you've got your sealing board, your type X, shaft liner, sheathing soffit, adhesives, finishing materials, fasteners, all those as well under C1396. And if you look in, you get into the fiberglass, which Dad will cover, that is under ASTM C1658.
We'll spend a little time here talking just about materials and terminology. It's not too complicated when you get into the drywall world. We have a lot of things focused around where we make the connections between the products, joint tape, joint compound. Setting compound, we'll talk about the difference between those two. Critical lighting, it often calls out for a skim coat. And so we'll talk about what a skim coat is and how it works. So as we start to think about aesthetically how we put these products together, all the pieces and panels, we hang in pieces and we throw them out there, and then we need to cover them up somehow. And so the primary way that we do that is through tape. And there's a couple different types of tape, and they have very different uses. As Alan talked about earlier in the ASTM standards, we need to meet the C475. Paper tape is a closed cell product that's basically designed to make sure that we help control the fact of cracking. Once that tape is embedded in the joint compound, it's hard to tear apart vertically or horizontally, either way. If we have some sort of racking of any kind, it's pretty difficult to make any kind of a penetration in there once we've got it firmly put together in the joint compound. So it does resist any kind of stretching and tearing. It's buffed, and so that helps it adhere to the paper drywall as well as adhere to the tape itself. From a standpoint of using this in products and areas where we would have concerns about mold and mildew resistance, we get this question often, and I will say with great certainty that we seldom have any kind of mold at all. I've never seen a piece of mold or any bit of mold growing on a piece of tape, even in some pretty severe areas, because the moldicides and fungicides and the preservatives that we use in the tape will just about kill anything and protect it from that standpoint. So 95% of the time, this is the product that should be specified on a typical new construction site. Fiberglass tape is totally different. It's an open cell product, and you would think that because it's inorganic, that would be a great place to use it in mold and mildew resistant areas, and it is. But because it's an open cell, it will move with any kind of racking or any kind of pressure that gets onto it. So where we typically see this specified the most and where it's used most often is in areas where you'll have facility management people who have a product that they need to get done maybe overnight. Let's say somebody opens up a door and puts a hole in a wall in a public area. They'll come in and if it's small enough, they'll not have to worry about getting it dry because it's so porous it'll dry. You'll use setting compound with this product and it'll dry. And then of course, in this particular area, we also sometimes will specify this in tile applications as well, something that's going to get wet repeatedly because it won't be affected by the water. Prior to the 1970s, all gypsum finishing products came in a bag, like the one you see here on the right-hand side of the screen. It wasn't necessarily setting compound. There's a difference between setting and drying joint compound. But it was a compound that you mixed up. You took many buckets of water. You had to have a water source on the job, and you would take buckets of water and you would mix them up early in the day. Most of the time you'd mix up one bucket the night before. And the reason for this is because it had to gel up, is the term that we use in the industry. It was a product that would break down over about an hour. So you had to have the product mixed up. And when it was mixed up, the composition of it, the viscosity of it would actually change over the course of an hour. And so that first bucket that you wanted to use, you wanted to have it ready to go. So you might take what we called a ready mixed bucket already from the night before. Well, it didn't take long for the manufacturers to understand that there was a marketing opportunity here. And so in the 70s, the manufacturers started to use what they called a drying type joint compound, where it would come like you see here in a 5-gallon bucket, or it also comes in boxes in a plastic bag. And that's important for me to note because of the supply chain issues we're having right now. Sometimes it's hard to get those buckets because they're petroleum-based products that with the price of gasoline and the price of oil in general, we're seeing more and more people move to boxes. So if you see submittals on your sheets for boxes, understand it's still the same product. We just put some in a bucket and we put some in a box. But the advantage of that is it can be pre-mixed in a factory to a certain viscosity that's consistent across a batch. Now, a batch is anywhere from 80 buckets to about 120, depending on how big the mixer is. And so then it's delivered to the job site in an area where you can use very little water, half of a cup of water, and you've got your viscosity broken down for a skim coat. If you're going to do a tape coat or a bed coat, you may just want to do it, just take it right out of the bucket, just mix it up to get it nice and smooth. And then setting compound is a product that you basically have a chemical set through water evaporation. So the difference here is that with the drying type joint compound, it's going to dry naturally when you put it on the wall. There's nothing you can do to hurry it up. The setting compound is something you would use in extremely wet situations, or you use maybe in the outside in a soffit or drywall that's going to be exposed into the elements on a regular basis, because it dries much, much harder. It's almost like a boat anchor. If you took if you mixed up a bucket of it and just left it in the bucket, you could use it literally as a boat anchor. You could put it underwater and use it as a boat anchor. But it mixes up in a regular place where it will go anywhere, depending on how much retarder we put in it, anywhere from 5 minutes for those facility management places that we talked about. Or if you wanted to use it into an area where you would maybe have 2 hours and 10 minutes. So again, the drying type joint compound is very versatile. We do have those in low VOC and low dust and mold resistant properties, typically used, almost always used with paper tape. It's going to be less expensive to put on the wall than the setting compound because you don't have to bring as much water to the job site. When you have the setting compounds, these are areas where someone is going to have to clean up their tools at whatever that pre-designed time is. Let's say you're using a 90-minute, which is 45 and 90 are probably the two most popular. And so after 45 minutes, if you've been using a bucket, even if almost all of it is gone, you're going to have to stop, clean up all your tools, put everything together, get a nice clean bucket of water and start again, because any imperfections that are in there for any residual mildew or any residual area from the previous bucket will accelerate the time that you set on the new stuff. So again, poor drying conditions. For example, let's just talk about drying conditions on the job site. Very important. The Gypsum Association, if you look at ASTM C840, they talk about environmental conditions, and they talk about the ideal is a 60-degree day with 50% relative humidity. And in that case, you can see if you put a product on the wall, if you put a coat on the wall of any product, any drying type joint compound, in 24 hours, you should be ready to put another coat on. A little different, Alan, than what you see down in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, for instance, I was checking the humidity in my backyard this morning. It was 82% relative humidity. So you can see, you get 60 degrees and say 80% humidity, you're looking at a thad circle, and there are 2.25 days to dry. But say you get 90%, but you get down southern Florida, Miami, that humidity level usually a little higher. I mean, you can get up to 4.5 days if it's down to 60, or even then if it's 80 at 90%, you're still looking at 49 hours of drying time. So, I mean, it's critical, as Thad mentioned, that you look at those conditions as, depending on what part of the country, but you get across the whole Gulf area, you have some pretty high over New Orleans and Texas, some pretty high humidity. You get up out in the western states, some dry areas there, but, as Thad we'll mention this several other times, that humidity and drying times is so critical when on these job sites.
Yeah, so from a standpoint of trying to keep the job moving, and we know as a drywall contractor, as a drywall industry, we know you can't always have perfect conditions at this point in your job. As a matter of fact, your jobs are seldom climatized at this point in the project. But it's important to understand how the effect of humidity and temperature does work on these, so you don't push your drywall contractor to do something that doesn't make good sense. There is a certain amount of open time that happens with joint compound, and you can get to the point where you can still coat over it even though it's not dry if someone's pushing you. But eventually it's going to have to dry, and it's going to have, that moisture is going to go somewhere, and typically it shows up in shrinkage, and we'll see an example or two of that later in the presentation. And then from a regional perspective, one of the other things that we need to just kind of discuss real quickly as we're talking about joint compound and submittals and those sort of things is there are different preferences in the country for different products. And let me just take a minute here and just say there are 3 different types of products in the drywall finishing world. There's the setting compound that we've talked about. There is a taping or all-purpose product that has some extra adhesive in it to help hold the tape to the wall. They shrink a little bit more than the other products, but they still can be used for all the coats. And then there's a topping product. So you have taping, you have setting, taping, and topping. And especially for those of you that are using spec link, those are the options that you will be given. When you get your submittal sheets, you're going to hear a variety and a plethora of different names because people use different terminology at different parts in different parts of the country. For example, contractors in Ohio and through the Midwest, they like what they call a light ready mix product. It's a product that is lighter to use. It has some perlite injected into it, and so there's little tiny air spaces that are put together with all the solids in the bucket, and so a 5-gallon bucket might weigh 48 pounds, as opposed to like in Allen's area where they're partial to all purpose. And that product down there, that same bucket will be 62 pounds. So you may hear people in Florida talking about all purpose. And if you do work in both areas, now you have a submittal sheet that shows all purpose, which can be used as a topping. And you have light submitted for the same type of project in Ohio that is a topping. There's also colored product. Some people in certain parts of the area, especially around Chicago, they'll use colored mud. It's got a yellow tint to it, so it's easier to see when they do touch up. So there's a variety of different things. Anytime you have a question, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you. A skim coat. A skim coat is more than a monolithic coat of joint compound that's put over the entire surface of the board to help equalize what the suction that will happen when the paint hits that product. So that you've got a monolithic product there instead of the open cell paper that you have, and then the joint compound, which has a little different feel and a little different texture. Understand that a skim coat is not a level 5. We're going to go through levels of finish here shortly. A skim coat is not a level 5 unless it's been preceded by all the appropriate first 4 levels. Primer. We felt the need to add primer to this presentation because over the last few years, we've got, with all the different types of spray equipment that goes out there and some of the heavy solids drywall products that are out there, we've kind of gotten a little cloudy on what an actual primer is. A drywall primer traditionally is a paint material that's formulated with a little heavier solids to fill those pores and equalize that absorption difference between the board face and the joint compound. There are also some drywall products that are out there that have heavy solids in them that have some paint mixed in. So there's a variety and a plethora of different ways that people touch those as well. But just understand a primer is important to help you get prepared in your critical light areas. And as we talk about critical light, let's look at a couple examples. This particular cafeteria here has you can see the storefront in the back, the side windows. There's a tremendous amount of natural light shining in, a lot of open air space here that has a lot of opportunity for any imperfection to be shown. And then you can see the different colors in this product as well. And as we'll see later in this presentation, paint color does make a difference. You would think that if it was a solid dark paint color, it would be easier to hide joints, but that's really not the case. And then if you look at the bottom picture, this is probably a prime example of every single possible kind of light you could ever have that's not friendly to drywall. This picture was taken from a storefront similar to the one you see in the distance. So you've got natural light at both ends of this hallway. You've got sconces here that are shining light both at the up on the wall and down on the wall. So you're getting critical light in those areas. You've got some nice little solid can lights right here that are also shining light down from a different angle. And then you've got some softer can lights in the center, which are fine. But at the same time, if you think about the amount of opportunity for things to be seen incorrectly on this particular wall, there's a lot. And so this is a true critical lighting situation. Both of these would be those types of areas.
So looking at the 5 levels of finish, the gypsum industry created a term to highlight the differences in the way we address different requirements for product application. So it works from a series of applications we call levels of finish, which you see right here. And as Thad mentioned, each one to get to that level 5 must be based upon the previous finish. So you can see as it continues to be built out to get to the 5 levels of finish here, which we're going to go through. So here is, you might be familiar with the 5 levels of finish, the GA214, the latest updated in 2021, which is going to cover some differences from the previous. But here's when you have the Gypsum Association of the Wall and Ceiling Industry, the Ceiling and Interior Systems Construction Association, and then your Painting and Decorating Contractors of America and your Drywall Finishing Council all on one page. It's a major accomplishment because, you know, Thad did some finishing many moons ago, but you know, he'll tell you, and some of our contractors we talked to, you know, it's the painters are pointing fingers at the finishers are saying it's a painting problem. And, you know, you as architects might see that out there, but, you know, constantly fingers can be pointed back and forth. But let me go over some changes in this new 2021 GA214. So basically in 2015, you know, fiberglass was added to the levels of finish. And the title was, you know, recommend levels of finish for gypsum board, glass mat, and fiber reinforced gypsum panels. Now the title is changed to recommended levels of finish for gypsum panel products. And for many of you, if you have ever downloaded, the previous one was a 2-page, you know, flyer that was $5. Now this one is 8 pages, and it can be downloaded for free. So if you go online, it's something that you can download, and it's very good to have on these job sites sometimes. As Thad was talking about primer, the definition was drywall primer. It has changed to just primer and modified to be more inclusive of materials used for finishes other than paint. And the comment section was updated accordingly as well. And then as far as definitions, there's better alignment to other industry publications, you know, such as the GA216. And then one thing to especially notice, but job site mock-ups, is clarity as to who is responsible for requesting mock-ups. The designer is to specify, and then the intent of a mock-up and what it shall be, including updating the 4 shalls on page 3 of that brochure. And then also if you go to page 5, which Thad is going to cover, is the inspection criteria on the slide later. But, you know, how do you inspect on these walls, you know, that have been finished out there? It actually gives you the information on how those walls should be inspected in the GA214. So here is the levels of finish. You can see here, you know, the GA 214. We mentioned the consensus of the 5 industry organizations is a huge accomplishment. You know, the requirements of that GA 214, and then these levels prepare a wall or ceiling for the final decoration, you know, to whatever degree that you see fit, you know, that should be specified to. So starting with 0, so actually you could say there's 6 levels of finish, right? 0, and this would be a temporary construction. Say you're walking through an airport or even a shopping mall, right? You'll sometimes see, okay, they're putting in a new store or a restaurant. They'll just have the gypsum board across the metal studs, temporarily, you know, covering the work and construction that's being done there. So sometimes you will see that, or maybe the final decoration hasn't been determined, so they haven't decided what level they will finish that out to. So here's a little video just explaining level 0 finish.
Level 0. Level 0 is typically specified in temporary construction or whenever the final decoration is yet to be determined. Gypsum boards are simply left as installed with no taping, finishing, or accessories required.
So then we move to the first level, level 1. You can see here, they're embedding the tape. You know, tape is applied with a knife or other tool. Excess joint compound, tool marks and ridges are acceptable. And here's a brief little video that explains the level 1 finish.
Level 1. Typically specified joint treatment and smoke barrier applications in areas not open to public view. All joints and interior angles shall have tape embedded in joint compound. Excess joint compound and tool marks are acceptable. Accessories are optional unless specified in the project documents.
So you can see there, that's a lot of times for smoke barrier or plenum areas, and then you can see if it's fire taping, they mentioned here that the fastener heads must be covered to achieve fire taping at level 1. So level 2 is the first level that really achieves fire taping status under the new guidelines, since level 1 didn't require spotting and fastener heads. So all joints have been embedded. You're now, you know, once again, you're building this out each time. You know, this could be maybe used in a garage or warehouse, or sometimes maybe you're doing pre-rock areas right in a corridor and you're running your HVAC and things like that up above. You got a drop ceiling coming down 3-4 feet and it's going to cover all that. So, you know, your best finisher doesn't really have to be in the area doing this because it's not going to be seen in most cases. So here's a little video explaining the level 2 finish.
Level 2, typically specified where gypsum panel products are used as a substrate for tile. May be used in garages, warehouse storage, or other similar areas where surface appearance is not a concern. The joints are wiped with a joint knife, leaving a thin coating of joint compound over all joints and interior angles. If joint compound is applied over the body of the tape and smoothed at the time of embedment in level 1, it shall satisfy the conditions of this level. Fastener heads and accessories should be covered with 1 coat of joint compound. Surface shall be free of excess joint compound. Tool marks are acceptable.
So once again, we continue to build. Here you can see in that little slide that popped up on the bottom, you've got now a wider area of compound that's going over those joints. So the level 3 is typically, you know, specified in appearance areas that are to receive a heavy or medium texture finish. You know, in Florida, a lot of knockdowns down here on a lot of these walls that you see. And before final painting or commercial grade wall coverings. Now, Thad will mention there's a number of thicknesses of some of these wallpapers. So you have to be careful out there. And, you know, once again, here now you're starting to see, right, mentioned in that GA 214, job site mock-ups shall be specified at this level of finish. So, you know, now you're starting to see that. You think about how often do you drive by a building and you've got a window and a stucco system or a brick system or something like that where they've done a mock-up. But, you know, it's not always done on these interiors of the buildings, and it can be a, you know, a huge advantage. And sometimes when you get down the road, which that'll show you some pictures and some other jobs that, you know, things have happened. If they just would have had a simple mock-up, it could have saved a lot of headaches down the road. So, you know, a primer is suggested prior to painting. And here's a little video, once again, trying to explain the application for level 3.
Level 3, typically specified in appearance areas which are to receive heavy or medium texture finishes before final painting, or where heavy duty or commercial grade wall coverings are to be applied as the final decoration. This level of finish is not recommended for smooth wall designs or applications where light textures, non-continuous textures, or lightweight wall coverings are to be applied. One separate coat of joint compound shall be applied over all joints and interior angles. Fastener heads and accessories shall be covered with 2 separate coats of joint compound. The surface shall be smooth and free of tool marks.
You know, most of us have seen a level 3 finish without maybe realizing it. Anytime you stay in a hotel, hoteliers are very cognizant of the fact that you've got a lot of different types of people carrying big, heavy suitcases in and out of their buildings. And so in their units, they tend to have some sort of a heavy grade wallpaper. We talk about wallpaper trying to be heavy grade, or some sort of a splatter texture. Also down through the Southwest and out in California, they'll do what they call a California knockdown, where it's even heavier than this. Again, in the Midwest, for those of us in the Midwest that live in some sort of a residential property, you'll typically see that your ceilings have some sort of ceiling texture on them. This is because light tends to shine in the windows across the ceilings and can show a multitude of sins. And so in the medium and the more affordable housing sections, especially, one of the ways to mask that is to put some sort of a texture on the ceiling, a starburst or a spray of some kind, some sort of a knockdown finish. And so it's there designed to basically help hide any kind of sins that would be there, a truss that starts to sag, or a finished joint that doesn't look fantastic or would shine without a level 5 finish. So instead of paying for a level 5, they'll actually specify a level 3 on that particular area of the building, which helps reduce some of the cost. So it can be used in a multitude of ways. Level 4 is where we traditionally would think of as our typical drywall finish. I would venture to say that 80 to 90% of the finishes out there traditionally go somewhere around a level 4, and that's probably the default or the go-to level of finish for most offices. This is a product where the light is correct and doesn't shine directly on the wall, and what we avoid with those critical lighting situations.
Level 4, typically specified in appearance areas where smooth wall designs are decorated with flat paints, light textures, non-continuous textures, or wall coverings are to be applied. This level of finish is not recommended where non-flat or dark, deep tone paints are applied. 2 separate coats of joint compound shall be applied over all flat joints, and 1 separate coat of joint compound should be applied over all interior angles. Fastener heads and accessories should be covered with 3 separate coats of joint compound. The surface shall be smooth and free of tool marks.
You know, this is the level where you start to see the transition between the gypsum products and the paint products. If you've noticed the past couple slides, they've talked about different types of paint that should be put over the gypsum products that would give you the finish you desire to be in level 4. This is kind of that transition point. Here's a good residential picture. This will eventually be a kitchen. You can see a small window in the center of the wall. There's going to be cabinets, upper and lower. There's several areas that are going to be covered in this particular area. Level 4 finish is perfect for this type of an application. As we start to think about lower lighting situations, this is what we call a dungeon hallway. We call it a dungeon hallway because it doesn't have any outside light other than the storefront you see in the distance. There's a row of lights right in the center of the hallway, which typically keep light directly away from shining down the wall. Perfect place for a level 4. Level 4 should be used most of the time, but there are certain areas in each project I would challenge anyone. In almost every project, there's somewhere where you're going to get some sort of critical light. And so the difference between the cost of a level 4 and a level 5 can be significant depending on the area of the country that you're working in. It's important to understand how to use this level correctly and specify it on maybe a different wall type or a certain area on your plans so that you can identify the areas for the painter and the drywall contractor to make sure they prepare the wall where you want to minimize the imperfections that you'll see from the critical light that shows up.
Level 5. Typically specified in appearance areas where smooth wall designs are decorated with non-flat paints or other glossy decorative finishes, dark deep tone paints are applied, or critical lighting conditions occur. This level of finish is the most effective method to provide a uniform surface and minimize the possibility of joint photographing and/or fasteners shown through the final decoration. A skim coat of joint compound or a material manufactured especially for this purpose shall be applied to the entire surface. The surface shall be smooth and free of tool marks.
I want to take just a minute before we show some examples to just talk about what we call the skim coat. There's a tremendous amount of controversy in our industry about what an actual skim coat is. A skim coat is nothing more than a monolithic coating of the surface. And as you can see in this picture, it's been pulled down pretty tight. Someone could mix up, and they do this sometimes, they'll mix up joint compound like water, they'll roll it on with a roller, they'll take a nice flat knife, and they'll pull it directly down as tight as they can over the paper. While that's not what I consider to personally be the best avenue for a skim coat, that does meet the intent of the skim. And so if you want to get, other than using the regular levels of finish, if you want to have a certain amount of millage left on the wall, or you want to have a certain procedure that you want, you may want to call that out in some special instructions at your job meeting before you get started. There was a time where everybody put it on with a hawk and a trowel as we moved over from plaster in the 50s and 60s over to the drywall. When it was skim coat was called out, it was actually put on with a hawk and a trowel where the product was put on and it was allowed to gel up a little bit and then it was pulled down tight. So you had much more millage on the wall. There aren't that many craftsmen left that know how to do that, but there are other ways that you can do that as well. You've got some high build products out there as well for primers and that sort of thing. So we understand that this is one of those areas where there's kind of some gray areas. We're going to show some examples and just talk a little bit about what can happen if you haven't specified it at all. And here's a good one. This is a 6-story building in the Chicago area. There was units on either side of the building. The building, just the way the lot laid out, it had to face the building. The long side of the building faced east to west. And so it was finished all at the same time. It was a fast track job and all 24 units were finished, were ready about the same time. So the painter came in and sprayed in the one day, they sprayed every single unit. And at that point, the owner walked through and this is what they saw on the ceilings in every single unit. Again, specified to a level 4. The paint was a decent paint they used. The painter was a good painter. The product was good. This wall felt smooth if you ran your hand over it. But aesthetically, this is an area where there should have been a level 5 specified. And so we talked a little earlier, Alan touched about the fact that in the GA 214 15 edition, and again in the 21 edition, it calls out an area for mock walls. And as we will oftentimes create partial mock walls of the exterior of a building on the outside because it's easy to do that, it's a little more difficult to climatize a certain area of the building, bring drywall in a certain spot. You've got a mechanical process, MEP process you have to go through to even get ready for drywall, inspections that have to happen. So in this particular case, if this job would have been specified with the first 100 square foot in place, and there'd have been a conscious effort for somebody to get a unit ready and start doing some finishing a little bit ahead of the rest of them, and then you get to a point where you get the one unit done or somewhere where you're concerned about critical light, and then you have an owner's rep or the owner, you have the GC or the CM, you have the painter and the drywall person all stand there at different times of the day or take a walk through it through different times of the day and just take a look. And this is more about meeting the owner's expectations, because we all understand in our industry what can and will happen if things aren't exactly perfect, if the conditions just aren't right. But from an owner's perspective, this might be the only building they build, or they might not do it often enough to understand what the final properties of the condition is going to look like. So in this particular case, think about doing the first 100 foot in place with a mock-up. They ended up texturing these ceilings, believe it or not. The owner just couldn't be happy with, once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. And they said, rather than skim over it, it would be easier to texture. So they textured these ceilings. Here's a job in progress where there's been a primer coat put on. This is a situation you can see there's, if you look out there, you've got a storefront that's not done. You've got no ceiling tile in here or anything. So we've still got the concrete on the floor. But in this particular case, that storefront was going to be open enough and there was going to be a row of lights pretty close to the wall. And the owner came in and said, I can see humps on that wall. And we had a discussion with him and said, no, sir, that wall is completely smooth. And he says, no, I can see all kinds of humps in that wall. We need to, we need to tear this wall, this drywall down. It's no good. And so we had the superintendent and the owner and a couple other people were standing around that put their hand on the wall, close your eyes, put your hand on the wall and stop where you think the hump is. And for the owner's rep and the GC, when they stopped, they were actually in the field of the board. So they were in this area, they weren't even on a joint. And so that convinced them that this was more of a reflectivity issue than it was an imperfection issue. In this particular case, we were able to we didn't have to do a skim coat in this particular case. What was done here was had the opportunity to paint over it with a high solids primer and then go ahead and put another coat of the satin that they had on the wall. And so in this case, it was minimal. But again, if this would have been specified as a level 5, it was something the owner never would have seen to begin with. Here's a dungeon hallway. And just you look at my cursor here, my pointer, you can see that there are some areas, even though it's a pretty dark wall, and you've got your walls, your light right where they should be to keep the right angle on the wall, you can start to see some issues here. And as you walk through that, or around that hallway, you could see. So paint color does matter. And the darker it is, the more difficult it is to hide. This is a school in Southeast Ohio. And again, this is one of those areas where the school board members were not happy with this particular product right here. They said there's humps in that wall. And when they put their hands on it, they could feel there wasn't. But because there was so much light, and with a high gloss paint like they were using here with these school colors, they ended up having to skim over these particular walls. And there was a pretty significant cost that was passed back to the owner because it was specified as a level 4, and that's what the owner thought they wanted, they were paying for. So why do some of these things happen? Well, sometimes it happens because you've just got so much light that shines down a wall. Drywall paper is not perfect. As a matter of fact, since the 1960s, all drywall paper, all drywall face paper has been 100% recycled. And so you would think that we were way above the curve for sustainability in the drywall world. And we'd love to claim that that's the case. But actually what happened was it's a product that's going to get covered up anyway. And it was less expensive to create recycled paper and present that to the plant than it was to use better product. And so as you can see right here, this is a regular piece of drywall just with a 500 watt light bulb shining down it. You can see that it's not a perfect product to begin with. And then there are different types of paper used, even by the same manufacturer, that will come out of the same plant. Each paper plant has different age, different requirements, different workability, different areas where they try to, different quality issues. And so in this case, here's a good example. This is the same manufacturer on a job site. And some of the board, it's all 5/8 type X, and some of the board came from one plant and some of it came from the other plant. Now, why would that happen? Well, traditionally it has more to do with somebody trying to fill out a truckload with a mix of product. Maybe they wanted some 54 that's only made in one place, or some glass mat products that's only made in one plant. And so they'll fill out a truckload with other products that come in, because to the customer, to the distributor and the drywall guy, drywall is drywall. It's all the same stuff. 5/8 12 is 5/8 12. Today, in today's society, it can be even two different manufacturers, because we're struggling so much with the supply chain issues and the economy the way it is, just to get product on the job site. So understand that these products will take paint differently. A good example here is a joint compound. This is a piece of board pulled right off the line at the plant. There's a small, just to take a 6-inch knife and just scrape joint compound over top of it and let it dry, and pull it down as tight as possible, and then put a 500-watt light bulb on it. So you can see how it creates a dissimilar surface, and because you've got some fill here and you've got some non-fill here, and under critical light, that will show up. Even though this was pulled down, this is just a very, very light skim, just whatever you can get. So you want it to be monolithic all the way through, so that when you do get critical light on it, you have less chance of seeing anything. Here's another residential photo that if this particular wall, or even this portion of this wall, would have been called out for a level 5, the homeowner, there's a light up here on this second floor to give some natural light into this area. This homeowner never would have seen that. In this particular case, they called us out to take a look and say, hey, there's something wrong. I can see ripples in this drywall. Well, they couldn't see ripples. What they could see is the flat seam here and a flat seam there, and you've got your nail spots where they slid their nails, basically, from the finishing aspect. The wall was perfectly smooth, but the owner was not happy with it. And so at this point in the job, there was a contractor that had to come back. So he held up the job a little bit while the contractor came back and skimmed this entire wall, just to make sure they kept the owner happy. And the interesting thing was, the day that we arrived, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it looked no different than the rest of this area right here. And so the homeowner was a little befuddled. She says, I know I saw some kind of problem, and we had her get out on a plank, which she wasn't all that thrilled about. We had her get out on a plank, and she could run her hands on there and say, see, ma'am, there's no ripples on this wall. But the next morning she called and said, they're back. And so it just was the art of reflectivity, and the fact that you could see that. And if it would have been specified level 5, that would have eliminated the problems. And that's what we ended up doing eventually. So from an installation standpoint, we've talked about job site conditions and how moisture has a huge difference with the way things dry. We've talked about mock-ups and inspections. So let's talk about some of these things that can go wrong and how we fix them. Obviously, the easiest thing to do is to climatize the building from a standpoint of keeping everything perfect. That's also the hardest thing to do, because seldom is MEP set up at that time. And with all that dust going around on the job site, you wouldn't want to turn it on anyway. You'd have it in every one of your ducts. So we do our best to keep any kind of temporary heat on the job, or keep our buildings closed, or put fans in there and keep them going. This is not a good place to even be hanging drywall at this point. For this example, understand that, and I don't know why this drywall is up here yet. Obviously, they've got some reason that they've started to put it on. Maybe they're just pushing the job. But drywall is a paper product, and it will absorb moisture. It won't hurt it to have some moisture on it, but it will take a while to dry out and climatize before it's ready to dry out and accept joint compound. Oftentimes, this doesn't happen. And so at that point, then you're going to have the paper drying a little bit. You're going to have the joint compound drying a little bit, and you just create opportunities to have joints that show through later. From a standpoint of painters, this is what Alan said earlier. Drywall guys and painters don't always like each other, because there are people out there that sometimes will take advantage of trying to stretch the paint a little bit more and maybe throw a little extra water in it, which is what those 2 clear buckets down there probably are for. And not this one that they're using to actually clean up their mixer. So make sure if you specified a certain viscosity or a certain type of paint, you're getting what you've specified and what you're looking for. Alan also talked about in the GA2 14, 15, and 21, how they've recommended and they've outlined some of the inspection criteria to help you manage your expectations, both from the application standpoint as well as the owner standpoint. And that is just as simple as use natural building light, stand 5 feet from the wall, 60 to 80 or 85 degree views. The no-nos, the traditional no-nos are the 500 watt light bulb. I've been on jobs before where there's been an engineer or an architect that have gone through with a small pencil and they've shown a 500 watt light bulb down and they're wearing out a number 2 pencil. And then, as silly as this sounds, at least get it says finish coat early in the job. I would say at least get a primer coat on the wall as soon as you can, because drywall is a paper product and it will scuff easier if it's not at least got a primer on it. So we talked earlier about the picture that we saw where I said that the paper can grow and get a little moisture in it, and the joint compound needs a chance to dry before it's painted. So here's a product where we actually had what we call excessive shrinkage. I mean, very excessive shrinkage. In this particular case, there was obviously a wet, maybe this job was done in November or whatever. This product was wet when it was painted, or this heavy texture was put on it. And so you can see there was excessive, this is extreme shrinkage. Kudos to the marketing department for finding this one for us, because you can see the nail holes, how pulled the joint compound in, and you can even see the crease in the tape, and on both sides of the tape you can see. So in this particular case, it was this job was probably finished in those areas down here where we're 80 or 90 degrees, 80 or 90% relative humidity. So try to stay as true to this chart as you can with that 60 and 50. And then we start talking about different cracking situations. If we have we can have too much cracking if we have product situations like this. And when we talk about cracking, it's important to understand the difference between joint compound cracking that dried too quickly or was too heavy a fill is this particular one here on the left. There's way too much joint compound on there that should have been pre-filled in some way with some sort of drywall product, and then you could skim over it and make it look better. That was just that drywall mud and had never had a chance. There's just too much of it there, and as it tries to dry and all that moisture goes out, it sucks up and it starts to look like the Mojave Desert. There's cracking that's stress related, which is what you see here on the left-hand side. This is a wall this is actually a ceiling. It's a vaulted ceiling with a skylight on top of it, and there's a scissor truss that sat right in that particular corner. And so in this case, the drywall actually was cracking and giving us an indication that there was some imperfections on structural capability on this wall. And it was screaming out, please fix me. And so in this particular case, this was cracking of a different type. This was a stress crack as opposed to a shrinkage crack. So how do you fix that? Well, in this particular case, you would let the product dry completely. You would see if any of it got loose. You'd dig out as much as you needed to get it down to a level area. And then you would start to either put some more on top of it, you would start to tape over top of it, and then you would start the process over again. Just going to take a lot longer. Nail pops have nothing to do with drywall finishing. Nail pops are something that's movement in the building of some kind. Over the course of maybe the first few months or the first year that you are starting to work, this can be lumber that is too dry, too wet, and it's starting to dry out, and it's pushing that fastener out or sucking it in. And so in this particular case, the action of getting this done is to let the building climatize, and then you drive a nail 1.5 inches on either side of it while holding it tight, and then you coat over it again and start to move forward with that.
So in summary, brief conclusion here. Once again, we went over the standards. ASTM gypsum sulfates established the basis for gypsum material and finishing applications, so that C840 is important. GA 214. Then your materials and terminology. The architect needs to be clear of the different types of gypsum materials and the correct terms to identify each. That level of finish, which level is appropriate. Probably every project is going to have some area where it could be a level 5 finish. I was in an architect's office here a month or so ago down in Orlando, and one of the architects said, window coverings are your friends. So in some cases, those window coverings in critical lighting areas can be a big help in reducing light and negative outcomes on your wall. So, but every project probably has some area where it could be a level 5. And then once again, Thad mentioned proper installation. Time and environmental conditions will affect proper application of joint compound. So it's so critical when the humidity and those levels are high that it does get proper drying conditions to, give you that final result that you want on that project. And we also have in our literature, if you go online, digital, in our joint compound, it actually gives you the chart that you saw, that drying table, and then also the times that setting compounds will set and things like that. So a very handy tool if you go on our website for installation, some of those things on joint compounds as well. So this concludes our architectural piece. Now we're going to go through some of our products here. So National Gypsum is the exclusive service provider of Gold Bond building products. Perma-based building products are cementitious, Proform are our finishing products, and then Dexcel roof boards are our commercial roofing cover boards. So here you see the Proform. You've got your setting compounds on the left, and then all your different other multi-use, your all-purpose, and all the other light and all the other varieties that we make out there for your joint compound needs. And then here also, if you're, looking at maybe a healthcare or an airport, you're concerned with dust, our Dust Tech, also lower VOC, great product in those areas. And there's a number of contractors down in Florida that use that in certain scenarios, but another great product that can help in controlling some of that dust on these job sites out there. XP, if you're all familiar with that, purple, right? Extra protection is our Gold Bond XP gypsum board. We also have the abuse and impact, a lot of healthcare, schools, and different areas like that. You see that being used. And then even more importantly is our sound break, as you see more and more calls with inquiries on STC rated assemblies. And then our shaft liner is another product in that line as well. And then if you need to worry about, hey, a warranty, the fiberglass would be our EXP interior extreme for interior, EXP sheathing, the shaft liner, and then the tile backer, which is the fiberglass with the acrylic coating. These would have a 1-year exposure warranty. So when you're concerned about moisture in those type areas, of fantastic product to use out there. And then looking at our Dexcel roof boards, you have on the left, the glass mat for mechanically attached. The middle is the FA for adhered roofing systems. And then on the right is our Dexcel cement roof board, which say you have a paper mill or an indoor swimming pool or a refrigerated Publix or Winn-Dixie type of grocery building that you need something that's better for moisture. Great uplift with this as well. That's a product with some of the lead times with fiberglass mat right now, something maybe you could get a little bit sooner. I know polyiso has been out a long time in the roofing insulation, but there's another avenue you could look at. Here is our PermaBase for interior, exterior applications. And then you see the PermaBase insulated CI panel. That is the 5/16 inch cement board laminated to a 2-inch total thickness that gives you an R10. We also have a 1 and 3 inch panel available for looking at continuous installation. You're just going around the building with one trip. Your insulation and cementitious product is connected. So it helps with speed and, insulation values out there on your buildings. And then sustainability, you can pull all this off our website for your LEED or HPDs. All that information is available to you from our website. And if you need assistance with that, Trang is our inside expert on some of those sustainability items out there. And then once again, our team on the left, and then the technical support guys here, Mark Chapman on the left, Jim Farrell in the middle, Sam on the right. Sam is an architect, but some of the best in the country. If you need technical support out there, these guys are fantastic and get back very quickly to you for your needs. So feel free to reach out. Our sound book, this is in the second edition. You can see acoustical, metal and wood systems, 16, 24-inch on center, different gauges of metal. So a good snapshot if you want to figure out, okay, I need to reach this STC. Here's some different assemblies that we can look at. So a great source available digitally, or if anyone would like hard copies, please let us know. Here's a couple examples. You can see the top right NGC number in that right picture. That's the testing information. The bottom of these, you'll see the UL assigned to those assemblies. So great sources of information, once again, available digitally or hard copies. Here's our purple book, which is metal framing, shaft wall assemblies, horizontal membranes, corridor. You can see all the different things that are in these books, a very handy resource, also in its second edition. Here's a couple of details. You can see the head of wall is also called out on that left picture there. On the right, the column, there's a head of wall, a lot of other information that's on there. So a great resource for you out there. And this is the latest that came out here a few months back. I believe we had over 500 downloads the first day, but you can see, you know, for wood designs, I can't tell you how many apartment buildings and things like that through the years I've been in, they've got a shaft they're trying to do or something like that, or a trash chute. And okay, how do we go between floor to floor? But you'll have head of wall and rim joist details, intersections of walls and floor ceiling assemblies, multiple design options for mechanical, stair shafts. So here's a couple details, just a fantastic source if you get into any wood construction. You know, ask us, we'll be glad to get you a hard copy or download the digital version. And our design and technical resources, fire and sound, technical specifications, your continuing education courses are listed, green building lead, product literature and submittals. All this can be found on our website, which they've done a fantastic job redesigning that in the past couple of years. So once again, on behalf of National Gypsum, we'd like to thank you all for taking time from your busy day and joining us. And hopefully you came away with some tidbits of knowledge. Thank you very much.